I'm inviting our guest up on screen now. I'm excited for this because this is a really interesting sector of the field that I don't know incredibly much about, so I'm really interested to get an introduction. We have with us here today Dr. Helle Horsnæs of the National Museum of Denmark. And what I'd like to ask you about in the hour or so of your time that you've offered us very generously, so thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So first of all, situate the north of Europe, particularly Scandinavia, with respect to the Roman Empire. What is in the late Roman Empire, say 300s, 400s AD, what is the relationship of these areas?
Well, it's pretty hard to know because we have few literary sources telling about actual interaction, and what we have is also very hard to interpret. So we are left with the archaeological finds. That means mainly finds of Roman objects from Scandinavia. So this is what we're dealing with. And then, of course, the interpretation of those finds. And
those finds...
You're gone.
I'm sorry, there's a lag. But those finds and objects include many coins, medallions, bracteates, that kind of thing, right? And how are those being used in Scandinavia?
The Roman coins and medallions are perhaps they are the largest groups numerically of Roman objects in Scandinavia, or in particular in the southern part of Scandinavia. And they're used in various ways in the Roman Iron Age, which is the earlier part of the imperial era. We find from the 2nd, 3rd century quite a large number of 2nd century denarii, but they linger into even 4th and 5th century, seems from the contextual evidence. So they are in some sort of circulation, not monetary circulation, I would stress, but they're being used and treasured. In the later empire, what we see are mainly gold coins and these rare gold medallions, which are being imported in some way to the non-Roman northern part of Europe, that is east and north of the Rhine-Donau borderline. And southern Scandinavia, of course, is part of that zone. So this is mainly what we find. There are, of course, also more rare finds of other object types. But for example, Roman pottery is extremely rare. Even tiny sherds, which you find everywhere in the Mediterranean area, are almost unknown in our areas. So what we get are the precious metals and treasured.
That's interesting. That suggests that what's being imported is specifically prestige objects and not functional objects. Is that correct?
Yes, I would definitely say that. Of course, we have to take into consideration all the object types that we do not find. Organic material, for example. We could easily suggest that wooden objects, leather, etc., was imported as well, but it seems not to. There's very little trace of that in Scandinavia. So even if we have good preservation in some of the box, nothing seems to have arrived of that sort of thing. They're metallic objects most of all.
And I read an article that you sent me by, I believe, a Polish scholar. Is it Bursche?
Bursche, yes.
And he made a comparison that I found really compelling to 19th century American interactions with American Indian tribes, with the giving of coins and medallions with the image of often of the president on them, as sort of peace tokens or perhaps prestige objects to be used among the tribes themselves, and without any literary attestations to this practice in the late Roman Empire. Do you think that is a good parallel for what's going on here?
Absolutely. We frequently use parallels from the ethnographic scholarship to sort of interpret the archaeological material, because when you do not have a written source, this is what we could suggest. Actually, there is a certain source which is somewhat later than what we're going to talk about today, namely from the end of the 6th century, which tells that the Byzantine Emperor Tiberius II gave gold coins or gold medallions to a Frankish king. So from the very early Frankish era. So in the very late part, it must have been around 580 when these persons were alive. So we do have this very rare incidence of a donation given from one emperor to a king, and we could easily suggest that that these coins that we found up north, in some cases at least, have traveled through Europe as donations, not necessarily from one person to another, but perhaps via a chain of interrelationships, seeing also that Roman coins and medallions are sometimes found in considerably later context than the time of production. It is easy to suggest that they have been treasured, perhaps being kept as part of a prince's hoard or his entourage, given to his entourage and then passed on, and thus also attaining extra levels of symbolic power via the biography of the object, which we of course cannot retell today, but we see also from the sagas much later, of course, but it is known from ancient Greek sources as well as from the sagas that you have this gift-giving rites where objects attain much more value by being exchanged.
Sure. So at the time, perhaps a coin minted in the reign of perhaps as early as Constantine somehow comes to the north, perhaps by some kind of donation to a ruler as a sign of peace or status. And then over the generations, it's someone remembers, well, this coin was sent by the emperor to this king, and he gave it to my father, who gave it to me, something along those lines, perhaps.
I think that's a very I think that's a very good explanation, because this is what you see from myths and sagas, that you have these biography of objects.
And are the objects being modified in Scandinavia, or are they left more or less as they were transmitted?
It often depends. When we talk about southern Scandinavia, in particular Denmark, and also northern Germany, the northern part of the Netherlands, etc., the gold coins of the 4th usually reworked outside the empire. We can see that when they are mounted in with rims and they have loops, that these are of non-Roman craftsmanship. They are distinguishedly different from, for example, the horse found in Egypt, where you have a completely different kind of mountains and settings for late Roman gold coins. So they have been adapted for another use.
And apparently often for wearing as jewelry.
Yes, sometimes you can actually see that they are more worn on the reverse of the coin, and you can also see that the coins that are mounted with a loop are mounted above the head of the emperor, so you're supposed to see the face of the emperor. I don't think that the South Scandinavian people actually knew who the emperor was. They might have considered him a god or whatever you might. But this person, this image was important.
And what do you think? I mean, maybe we can't get an answer to this, but do you think that they are interpreting it as some kind of deific figure or as a king? I mean, is there some sign maybe in what might be written on imitation coins?
Yes, we have several levels of imitation of Roman coins in various areas of the non-Roman parts of Europe. There are some imitations made imitating 2nd century to early 4th century coins made in the northern part of present-day Ukraine, and they are found in huge numbers there and in the southern part of Poland, and even enters into Denmark in some particular cases. They are most often looped or pierced, and the piercing, of course, can be used to put it on a string, or they can be used to put in a rivet for a type of loop. These are imitations of coins and coin size, but we also have the much different Nordic imitations, as we normally call them, the Nordic brackets. They're one-sided. They're made in a slightly different technique by pressing from the reverse into a mold. And they have figures which have been adapted, inspired by the Roman medallions and coins, but they are put into a whole new setting. And these have variously been interpreted as the Nordic gods. And even scenes of Nordic myths. It's quite easy to see that they have been inspired by the Roman coins. Sometimes we have a figure, a group of 3 persons, which in the Roman setting would be the emperor between a picture of the deity Victoria, or personification of victory, and another person, often a soldier, standing on the other side. But it is transformed slightly into the brackets, where they can be reinterpreted as the death of Balder, one of the gods of the Nordic mythology. So,
And are there? I'm sorry, please.
Oh, go on.
There's a lag, so sometimes I interrupt you without trying to. Are there runic inscriptions that ever shed any light on what's pictured there? I know that sometimes I see bracteates from finds, such as the recent Vindalab find, that have runic inscriptions on them. Do these ever unambiguously point to what the image is supposed to be?
There are some runic inscriptions. I'm certain you know far more about runic inscriptions than I do, actually, but there are some of them who seems to refer to Wotan, Odin, or to certain phrases, magical phrases. So you find runic inscription on the brackets, but you even find in some cases what you could call pseudo-Latin letters. They are supposed to look like Latin letters, but they are not. And you can see they're sort of imitating the inscriptions of the Roman medallions and get them slightly wrong. And these are typical features of some of the brackets. It's not all of them, certainly not. It's a minority, but it's not uncommon.
That's interesting, because it suggests to me that the content of what the Roman coin says is meaningless to them, but that the fact that there's Roman writing on it at all is prestigious.
It's definitely very prestigious. A small group of imitations of Roman medallions, which are not brackets. They're double-sided, then they're struck. Were probably made in Norway, I would guess, because of the distribution of finds, but they're very rare. Yeah, it seems that the writing is indeed a very important part of this, because they're there. The writing is, even though you cannot read it, you know there must be a writing on this. There must be letters. So this is a part of it.
It reminds me of the way that some shops, to try to suggest a feeling of another place, might use pseudo writing in some other writing system to suggest an atmosphere of an exotic locale. So you might go to like a cheap Chinese restaurant where there's Chinese writing, but it doesn't actually say anything. It's just sort of supposed to look like Chinese writing, or a place that's supposed to be like a Russian tea house and has sort of fake Russian writing with, backwards R's where they don't belong instead of being used as a vowel ya, that kind of thing, where it's just supposed to suggest.
I think it's
interesting.
very good comparison actually, because it's important for us, even if we believe that we're eating in a Chinese restaurant, and if you can't read Chinese but it just looks right, then it's okay.
Right. It seems like a similar feeling. I have a question here from one of my patron supporters, Carl Pritchett, asks, or he says, the Celts used Roman coins and tribute silver to create large neck chains and torques. Is there evidence of Roman coins being reused to create similarly unique Norse jewelry?
It's hard to say. We don't have natural sources of gold or silver in Denmark, for that matter. So all that was made of gold and silver in southern Scandinavia would definitely be made of imported metals. It's very commonly believed that Roman coins was part of this import, but it's normally be said that the Roman coins were probably melted down. We don't have hard evidence to show that, because it's very, very difficult to provenance metals in particular, because they're being reused again and again. But technologies are advancing in these days, and it's getting more and more possible even to look at reused material and see whether they could come from various sources, geographical sources. I kind of go into detail of this because it's a specific field all of its own, and it implies a lot of technical stuff that I don't know much about. But I hope that one day we might be able to have some samples taken from Roman coins as well as from local objects to see how well they actually fit. But it could be very difficult because you reuse metals, in particular precious metals, all the time. But
I
we
hadn't
can
thought
say,
about it.
yeah.
Go ahead.
We can say that when it comes to making necklaces, it's quite evident that many of these Roman coins, the gold coins that is, have been reused as necklaces, and more importantly, they are found in context together with the Nordic bracelets. So it's quite possible that you could have these magnificent necklaces made up of Roman coins, which have been secondarily looped, brackets, and sometimes even small beads which were meant to sit between two brackets or two coins, because otherwise it was sort of tumbled together. So those division beads were quite important, and those are locally made as well. So you have a functional, the use of coins, brackets, medallions was the same in southern Scandinavia and northern Europe. So in that sense, they became the same object type, even with a different production area. But the melting down, it's a huge problem that we have to deal with.
And I hadn't thought about how much metallurgy would be part of the study of these things, and how much that could help potentially establish provenance for these items. But you mentioned with an earlier remark about a type that you thought was made in Norway because of the distribution of finds. Is that typically how you arrive at conclusions about where these items are made, or do they sometimes have? I mean, I think about American coins that have marked on them which mint they're made in: San Francisco, Denver, Philadelphia. Is there something similar with these coins, or are we not that lucky?
In the late Roman period, where we're dealing with in the 4th century, there are different mints, and they are all mint marked, so you can actually tell which mint produced these particular coins. The imitations from Norway, my suggestion is Norway, because the majority of the specimens have been found there. But it's a very heterogeneous group, actually. There are differences in sizes. There seem to be stylistic differences, etc. So it's more complicated to actually deal with this group. But it's striking that it has so far been found in Norway, some parts of Sweden, and a single specimen from Denmark. And when you look at the Roman medallions which have traveled north, there are quite a large number outside the Roman border in it's almost a half moon shape from Romania up to Denmark and even in Norway. So it's a completely different distribution.
And you mentioned that I was actually surprised when you mentioned, was it 1st and 2nd century AD coins as early as that show up? That just strikes me as surprisingly early, right? I was thinking 300s, 400s, but really then even much earlier in the empire, these coins are making their way north. Is there an earliest?
Well, the earliest finds are a couple of Hordes from Denmark, which consist of mainly Republican coins, one ending with Augustus and another one ending, well, as far as I remember, Vespasian. And the Republican silver coins were circulating within the empire for a long period, for a very extended period. They were not withdrawn from circulation at any point. So they lingers on well into the 1st century after Christ, and only disappear inside the empire around 100 AD. So they do turn up, but these Hordes are exceptional that far north as what we have here. But there seems to be an early phase of connection with the Roman Empire, where we have very exotic objects, glass vases, drinking horns made of glass, found in princely burials. So there is this early phase with exotic imports, and then a later phase where the coins actually come in, and then this is a 2nd century coins basically, which come in, and they're being found in context dating from around 210 up to the 4th century, early 4th century. We have one very interesting find of a huge sacrifice of weaponry from a battlefield, which is dated by dendrochronology around 210, and there you have 2nd century coins as well. So other finds include coins in burials, a few of them, but they are dated throughout the 3rd century and into the early 4th century. And those are 2nd century denarii.
This is a long range of time at which these objects are not only coming north, but being used in the north.
Very long. I could add that even in the burial of King Kilderic, Frankish burial, which is 480 or something like that, you find both late Roman gold coins and 2nd century denarii silver coins. So you have this very extended use of the silver coins outside the empire.
That's a long time in circulation. For just closing a door to try to get some sound quality better. I'm very surprised at the length of circulation, but I guess precious metals don't deteriorate the way that nickel or copper do, so they can circulate longer. So you mentioned an earliest point. Is there a latest point, a late, surprisingly late burial toward the end of when we find these coins?
They seem to disappear during the 6th century, but the problem is that some of our dating material disappears as well, in Denmark in particular, because the burial rites are changing. You don't have burials with the material in those periods. Actually, you get burials from Norway, and from the Netherlands of that period. Whereas in between, in the Danish and North Germany areas, you get what the Germans call the Hortfundhorizont, the period of hordes, and they are of course a bit more difficult to date. Even also because as the Vinaloo Horde, they contain material from several periods.
And well, you just mentioned the Vindaloo Horde, so let's talk a little bit about that. This has been a really exciting recent discovery. What can you tell us about it? What have you seen from that find that that you can tell us about in the context of Roman coins and medallions?
I think this is really a very extraordinary find, because hordes with that many Roman medallions are extremely rare. It's not an everyday find. It's really on a European level. It's one of rare hordes. There are, of course, the bracteates, which some of my colleagues are studying, the Nordic bracteates, which are huge compared to normal. The centerpiece with the image is normal size, but the rims are really broad. But what we have from Roman coins are 4 what we call medallions. Actually, they are larger than normal Roman gold coins. 2 of them weighs around what is it, 6 to 8, 9 grams, but 2 of them are 40, 41 grams, and this is quite large for Roman medallions. So comparing them to finds from elsewhere in Europe, you only get them in the largest hordes. There is a horde from present-day Romania and another from present-day Poland, which are both larger than the Vinaloo even, but this shows about the size of this find. It's huge, and it changes quite a lot in our perception of how far this material traveled. We had one single very large medallion from a find in Denmark before that, and some smaller medallions, but they were all single finds or found together with other coins. So the fact that 4 of these were found together, it's really something extraordinary.
And what is the current thinking on the date of this find?
I believe that my colleagues put the date in the early 6th century. We have sort of 3 periods, if you may say so. We have the 4 Roman medallions, which are from the 4th century. There are a number of Nordic bracteates, which are normally dated between 450 and 550. And there is a single mouthpiece from a sword scabbard, as far as I understand, which I believe is typologically a bit later, sort of early 6th century. So this is the current situation for this particular horde.
And the Roman coins, are there inscriptions on them?
Yeah.
Or the medallion? In Roman or?
This is all in Latin letters, normal Latin letters that we're supposed to read, and there are, well, the normal phrases that you find on Roman coins. When I talk to students, I say that you should think about text messages, because the abbreviated words telling the curriculum, the CV of the emperor on the obverse very often, and then they invoke the ideas that they want to promote on the reverses. Until the Christian era, this is very often the side where you found various deities, but they are giving way to personifications which can be taken into the Christian faith after the Christianization of the Roman Empire. We are in the very early phase of Christianity as an official religion. There are some backlashes during the 4th century. But so basically what you have is an iconography which is continuing the Roman iconography, but what was this slight what you could call Christian bias. So you have virtues, you have personification, but you do not have real Roman gods on the reverses of the coins.
And these personifications, you mean, for example, Victoria?
This could be Victoria, which of course is celebrating the victory of the emperor, and as she is dressed always in a long tunic and with the wings on her back, she becomes sort of the figure which becomes an angel later on in the iconography. So there's not a huge leap from victory to the angel when you look at the figure.
True. And in the Vindaloo Horde, are there? Can you tell us anything about the specific coins that are found there?
Yes, I can. I have not seen them in person. I've had very good photographs sent to me from the local museum, who's currently working on the coins and on the other finds as well. And so it's quite easy to see what they are. They are basically dating from the latest part of the rule of Constantine the First, or Constantine the Great. The oldest medallion of the find is also one of the largest ones, is dated in the last year of his life. And we have from the later Emperor Constans, we have Valentinian the First, giving name to the Valentinian dynasty, and Gratian, which is almost contemporary with Valentinian the First. So the range is from 350 or 335 to around 375. It is a date range which for the production of these medallions. So there are 4 different emperors, which is quite important.
And quite a bit earlier than when the find was probably deposited.
Much earlier.
And are these probably manufactured in the empire, or are these outer empire imitations?
They are made inside the empire, but they're not made in Rome, which you might believe when you're talking about the Roman Empire. Rome at that time was not the main mint of the Roman Empire after reforms by Diocletian, because I mean the Roman Empire was huge and it was unmanageable, really. So Diocletian in the late 3rd century, to stop endless conflicts, tried to reboot the whole empire and made a very large amount of reforms, which were carried on later on by Constantine. And among the many reforms made at that time was the installment of multiple mints, which were very often situated close to the borders of the empire. So you could have easy access to coin in all parts of the empire, that is. And these coins are made in Trier, which is Augusta Treviorum, now close to present-day Cologne in Germany. And the 4th was made in Thessaloniki, which is in the northern part of modern Greece. So these are from these relatively new mints on the border of the empire. Trier was one of the main cities, really, in the 4th century of the Constantinian period. Constantine himself had very close connection to Trier, and you have huge monuments of the Roman era still standing in Trier today. So you don't have to go to Rome itself. There are quite a lot of Roman stuff also everywhere else within the empire, and Trier is one of the very interesting places to visit. Because of its great importance in the 4th century. So it's not uncommonly that you find coins from Trier there, but this is definitely an imperial main mint of Rome.
Well, and Cologne or thereabouts is reasonably close, and certainly at I would think, kind of the outer borders of the empire. But Thessaloniki is not close. I mean, that's something that had to travel a long way through many hands, probably.
Yes, it's far, but it was an important mint as well in the 4th century, and with quite a considerable output, and even an output of medallions. So you might find them in Antioch in modern day Syria. There is also main mint, and it also produced gold medallions. which occasionally find its way into Europe. So it's not a problem of distance. People did travel, both within and outside the empire.
And looking at these coins from this particular find, do they shed any light on what we know about why this hoard was deposited, whose it might have been? I've seen some speculation, and I'd be interested to know what you think about this, if you think you're ready to have to state an opinion about it. If this was like a community or perhaps a single wealthy person who deposited these, or is this a burial? Is this a sacrifice? What is do you think is the context of this? Do the medallions shed any light on that?
Not really, not very much, I would say. There is some thoughts to remember, namely that these are medallions made during naming 4 different emperors. They're not exactly from the same date. And the British art historian Joycelyn Toynbee, who made the standard reference work back in the 1944, I think it was, on Roman medallions. They are so rare that little has actually been written since then, because there's not much new material to deal with. But well, she proposed that they were handed out, and she has quite convincing arguments. They were given as special gifts from the emperor or the imperial house in recognition for certain, celebration of victories, for example. There are quite a number of them, in particular in the 3rd and early 4th century, which seem to have been handed out in connection with anniversaries, or the New Year, or the anniversary of the emperor's what you call it, acclamation, sort of these spectacular situations. Whereas in the later 4th century, which we are dealing with right now, it's becoming a bit more difficult to actually call upon a specific date for these coins. They're within the reign, but it's certainly considered that these medallions must have been handed out as special gifts, and the greater the medallion, the greater the gift. Actually, among the early 4th century, you can see that the smallest medallion have a number of them have inscriptions referring to the equites, to the order of the, what do you call it, writers in Rome, and slightly larger have inscription referring to senatus, the senators of Rome. But the very large ones, they're a bit more difficult, so they could easily have been handed out as special gifts for special occasions and traveled on as that.
Well, I think you've just touched on a little bit of this. Cameron Patterson asks about conclusions we can draw about religious beliefs or practices of the culture who buried these hoards. I mean, without literary evidence, it's very hard to know, but it does seem like this is part of a pattern of this kind of hoard, with all kinds of precious objects, be they Roman medallions, be they native bracteates, being buried together.
Yeah.
Are there often? Sorry.
Oh, go on.
I was going to ask: Are human remains ever associated with these hoards?
No, not as far as I know. These are normally gold hoards with various objects, but made of gold. And interesting, the bracteates and the Roman coins or medallions often go together. And
let me just invite anyone else who's got a question to go ahead and submit it here. And I want to ask another question that moves us a little bit away from the Vindaloo hoard, if I may, which is, is there any other particular find, be it in Denmark or somewhere else nearby, with these Roman medallions or coins that's particularly eye-opening to you, that perhaps shows us something surprising about trade routes or the timeline of Iron Age Scandinavia that perhaps people aren't aware of? Anything we should go read about?
I think what's important is that you cannot trust the date of the Roman coins or the Roman medallions, because you can get quite an exact date of the production, but you cannot tell when it was deposited. Quite a lot, as we've known, have been found as part of Hordes, and this, in my view, implies a sort of certain religious or ritual deposition. But it also shows that they could be around for quite a long time before they were deposited. So this is one of the things that I think it's important to stress here.
Right. The same way that, well, you might have a $quarter today that says 1955, and someone could find it 200 years from now, and they can say it was minted in 1955, but when was it dropped in the place where we found it? Right. Yeah, I see what you mean.
Exactly.
We also have a question here from John Phillips. It says, considering the dating of these finds and the mention of Thessaloniki, could this be one vehicle for an alphabet entering Northern Europe, i.e. a potential inspiration for the runes?
I think I would not be too certain, but I think I understand from my colleagues that the current belief is that the runes were a bit earlier than this, the earliest use of runes. But we are in the same period, more or less. But I would not be too specific with that.
Right. I could certainly see it influencing the development one way or another, just since it's an input of alphabetic writing. But yeah, that's a really tangled question, where exactly the runes come from.
Yeah, we do have Roman coins in safe context from little after 200 AD. So at that time it was available, and probably even earlier Roman coins with writing were available, could be looked at. So it's definitely possible that somebody saw it, but the genesis of the runes is a very different question.
My assistant Sella asked if you have any conclusions or thoughts on the possible connection of the Vindaloo find with the 536 climate event that some people have speculated about.
I think everybody nowadays agree that, there's good literary evidence from China, from the Byzantine Empire, from various sources, that something happened around that date, that the sun was darkened, and we're talking about a volcanic eruption which left a cloud of ashes sort of covering for the sun, and there are also various other problems around about that date. Pestilence of the Byzantine Empire during the 6th century, quite a lot of it, even at various periods, and the position of gold in Northern Europe have by some scholars been connected to in particular the volcanic eruption of 536. I cannot really have an opinion about that, not a strong opinion in any way, because the Roman material is always much earlier. So it doesn't help us establish a date. What we say is we know definitely, because the regnal years of the emperors is quite well known, so we can see this is definitely after that date, but the Nordic material is considerably later, so we're not really useful in this sense of dating the deposition. We have this brief mention that I said before, that Tiberius actually gave gold coins or gold medallions to a Frankish king in the late 580s, which is considerably after this event. So something could easily have happened even after, and we do have other evidence from the Netherlands, from Germany, which indicate that some gold was definitely available after this event. But it's a very difficult question to answer.
Well, if I have one big takeaway from this discussion, I'm impressed at the amount of and length of commerce between the Roman Empire and these pretty remote areas north of it, right, over many centuries, and the way that these Roman items became not just material. They're not just material trade goods, but they're cultural trade goods, right? They become something of prestige and the culture of receiving them. That's really impressed me in reading about this and hearing you talk about it today.
I think it's very impressive, and I think it's also interesting to note that some of these medallions, and particularly one of the medallions from the Vindaloo hoard, is extremely closely connected to one of the coins from a large hoard in Romania, and in a hoard in Poland. I mean, you can actually talk about perhaps the same die was used to make the obverse, the front of one of the coins in the two hoards. So this is how close we are. And when you look at the way the loop is fitted also in this coin, with very delicate fitting with small gold pearls along the loop, it is almost identical. So what we have here is a situation where you could even imagine that the same goldsmith fitted the loops on those two coins, but they're found several hundred kilometers apart. And I think this is really important, and it shows something about the connectivity that you have both within, but also, and not least, outside the empire, from various areas of non-Roman Europe. It's a huge distance.
And how interlinked these economies are at such a distance.
Yes, they are interlinked. I imagine that you have this elite level of what you call princely level, or kingship, or whatever you could call it, of local magnates who are linked with long distance relatives through intermarriages, alliances, etc., as we hear about it much later in the medieval period. And I think that the way that you can see these Roman coins and medallions are traveling around, and in particular the way the local loops and mountings are made, that I think that strengthens this idea that they were not isolated barbarians in small towns. They actually knew each other, and you can also nowadays begin to see some of these ports of trade, which you could call it, or centers, that we have a couple of them in Denmark as well, where you actually find huge amounts of imported objects, among them some medallions.
And then I'm also fascinated by the fact that they're imitated locally too, right? Speaking to, again, this wider world of connections, where it's not just it's how to put this, it's prestige isn't just generated locally, it's generated by association with the right people outside.
Yes. And what is important is one of those large hoards where you do find Roman medallions in a considerable number also holds Nordic bractets, and that is one of the southernmost finds of Nordic bractets at all. So this is, again, they are connected.
Yeah, it's too bad we don't have more writing from this period to tell us more about this time. But it's cool piecing together these puzzles. And thank you very much for taking the time to help us piece together a little bit of this puzzle, and for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been a pleasure to meet you and to discuss this with you.
Well, it's absolutely been my pleasure. for now, I'll let you go. I know you had limited time for us, and I'll wish you and everyone who came for today all the best.
Okay, thank you.